Persecution of Christians is on the way up in America, giving today's believers a taste of what the early church had to face. The Word of God gives clear direction on how Christians should respond to an antagonistic culture. It also tells us how not to respond. Today, Erwin Lutzer summarizes how to live in a godly way in an increasingly godless society. Stay with us. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Today, Erwin Lutzer continues his new series on Christians in Conflict. His first message traces what happens when religions collide and how Christians should respond in light of 1 Peter chapter 3.
We live with kingdom values. We go deep into the culture. We don't avoid the culture, but we remain distinct within the culture. And we live with kingdom values. And then let me say also that we live understanding our testimony and being willing to share our testimony. Notice what the text says. I'm now in verse 15. But in your hearts regard Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is within you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience. By the way, one of the reasons that we can teach people personal evangelism, and they can learn it all and still don't evangelize and still don't witness, is because if Christ is not sanctified in your heart as Lord, if you've got other agendas that mean more to you than Jesus, it's hard to witness. If your heart is cold and you're kind of indifferent and the passion for Jesus is gone, it's difficult to share your faith. What you want to do is to just retreat. Like one woman said, I don't want others to know that I'm a Christian at work because I've got some issues in my life and I don't think that I'd be a good witness for Jesus. Well, God bless her. I understand what she's saying, but she'd better take care of those issues so that she can sanctify the Lord as God and then give a defense. The word defense in Greek is apologia, from which we get apologetics or apology. Doesn't mean that we're apologizing for our faith. By no means. It means that we're defending it. Are you able to defend your faith? If somebody says to you, well, I think Jesus is one way among many, are you able to answer that question? You say, well, I don't know. Well, there have been so many books, and I know somebody who's preached a lot of sermons on those kinds of topics that can be used to study and to learn and to say, I need to be able to answer that so that I can give a reason for the hope that is within me and I can tell people why I belong to Jesus Christ and not to some other faith. And what are the roots of our faith? You see, we learn then to do apologetics by lifestyle, and when we're asked, and sometimes even when we aren't asked, but there's an open door, we share with others the reason for the hope that is within us. That's the way in which we live in a pluralistic world. Now let me give some practical suggestions, and then I'll say, like Luther at the Diet of Worms, Ich bin hindurch, which is to say, I'm out of here. That's the way he ended it when it was open. All right. First of all, respect other people's freedom of conscience. You expect them to respect your freedom of conscience. You respect their freedom of conscience. Notice what the text says. When you are giving a reason for the hope that is within you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. You respect other religions. Sure, there's going to be conflict. Sure, there's going to be misunderstanding. Remember this, that if you were born in Saudi Arabia, it's entirely possible, statistically, that you would grow up Muslim. And if you were born in China, you might be Buddhist. You see, what we need to do is to realize that we're dealing here with real people in real situations, in real contexts, so we don't come with an attitude of superiority, we don't come with an attitude of anger, but we do in humility give a reason for the hope that is within us. We do it with meekness and we do it with fear, not judgmentalism and superiority. So we respect other people's religions. Secondly, we dialogue with them. We dialogue and we learn. As I was preparing this message, I thought to myself, one of the tragedies in my own life is that I know so few of other religions in any kind of an in-depth, intimate way. I'd like to get to know other religions. In the work that I do, I'm somewhat isolated. What an opportunity God has given us by bringing so many different people from so many different countries and so many different religions to the shores of the United States. But then at some point, you can accommodate, but at some point you can't. When I was in Istanbul a few years ago, I had a guide, a Muslim guide, for an entire day. He met me at the hotel in the morning, and we didn't come back until after dinner that night. And he was giving me a tour of Istanbul, going to all kinds of interesting places. And it was just he and I. He said that he was a very devout Muslim, and that because of his devoutness, he'd prefer if he could pray during the day. Muslims are to pray 5 times. I know that there was one time, I think, in the morning and one time in the afternoon. I told him, look, when it's time to pray, you simply go into the mosque, you stay there as long as you want, and when you're finished, you come out, and I'm going to be outside waiting for you. I said, I want to respect your faith. We had some very interesting conversations, by the way, that I will tell you about sometime in another context. But I respected his faith. In the afternoon, he washed his feet. He went into the mosque, and he said, come in with me. So I went into the mosque, and there I saw just hundreds and hundreds of men bowing and saying prayers. And then he knelt, and he said to me, he said, you can't stand when you're in the mosque and everybody's praying. He said, why don't you just kneel down? Why don't you just kneel down? I said to him, look, I'm glad that I have the privilege of seeing everything here. But you know what? I'm just going to go and I'll meet you when you're finished. And I went outside. You see, I couldn't kneel down. Because even though Allah and Jehovah have some similarities, they have such radical difference